Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. The first offering of the platform is a public speaking course called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about it, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Olli Wueseke. I think I got that right.
Yes.
He's a wonderful. He's a director of R&D for a biotech company in the Bay Area and a fervent supporter of science communication. Holding a PhD in molecular biology, I look forward to speaking with him about the importance of public speaking for scientists, his current work, and his communication style to his team. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Olli.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks for having me.
You got it. First question. So from doing a little background digging on you, I saw that you studied biology as your undergrad degree. What motivated your interest in biology?
I guess I grew up with nature documentaries and read every dinosaur book or anything on sharks and whales I could when I was a kid. And then during school, I realized this is understanding how things around us work. Concepts like evolution is really something that really interested me. And so I went into the studies for biology, and I realized that there's a whole new world, with genetic modifications, all the treatments that we can now, cures that we can find for certain diseases. It's fascinating, and a whole new world opened up when I started studying. And so I think it kept going, and it went from trying to understand how the world works around us to a little bit more recreating life in a dish. So instead of studying natural concepts outside, I moved into taking, proteins that you find in cells and measuring how those proteins interact with one another outside the cells, trying to really get just as if you were to look at a car and you take away its parts and you try to understand how the engine works and do biology. And so now I'm using human stem cells to grow models for human brains. So we take the stem cells and make little human brain tissue parts out of it we can use for drug screening in the company.
Oh, wow. That's some pretty interesting stuff.
Yep.
Another thing I saw from just doing some research on you is that you ended up getting a PhD. What was the motivation for that?
That's a good question. So when I did the studies in Germany, and so as a biologist, when you look on the job market, the people that typically end up in companies and high-ranking positions as a scientist or STEM, in particular for chemistry and biology, all have a PhD. So if you wanted to be competitive, you had to get that degree. Okay. I think it's a little bit more flexible in the US, and maybe Germany is opening up to that concept a little bit as well with the new master's programs that they have. But back in the days, you had to get your PhD.
Okay, so in Germany, at least at the time when you were doing it, it kind of was like a need to have, just to be competitive to have the PhDs. Because at least in this country, when people get PhDs, at least initially, their idea is staying in academia. And
I had the same one, but okay. And basically, it's also somewhat of a requirement, at least for industry. For the high-ranking positions. And so it actually turned out into, with a desire to become a professor and be able to, talk about science a lot. I think that is, that was the peak interest that got me into it. And it turned to a very interesting, ride for a life, right? So every PhD always goes through the initial excitement phase. And then, you start reading up on your topic, and then you start doing experiments, and initially you're very inexperienced in doing experiments. And so because it's science, and science, can be tough, and most of the experiments fail, you hit that emotional dip where, every PhD needs to, drag himself out again. And so I think the PhD itself is probably much more than an educational piece on the topic and becoming an expert in something, but really a life lesson in resilience. And so, that was really cool.
For sure. At least of all the PhD, just what you just described, pretty much describes every PhD that I know. You're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of them, they start off, I think almost to a T. All of them start off thinking, I'm going to be a professor, a tenure track professor when you start. But then it's somewhere down the line, they start thinking, maybe they see the kind of the landscape, and there's not enough jobs to support all the people that are graduating from PhD programs. So now you got to find something else to do. Is that kind of what happened to you? Or
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so right after my PhD, I basically started considering maybe going into, backing up startups as a science advisor. But then I decided, okay, I love science so much. Let me give them one more shot. And then I basically asked myself, what do you think is the coolest thing on the planet that you can do right now? And that's when, back in the days that, around 2013, there was this paper published around this, taking stem cells and growing human brain tissue from it. And so I thought, okay, let me just try that and see how cool it is. And, it's pretty cool. I'm not a professor now, but I still do science, and I have my team that's basically functioning as a research group. So, I think there are possibilities to do the same thing as a professor would do, at least partially, also outside academia and industry.
For sure. And then, at least from the PhDs I know, the ones that eventually give up I won't say give up, but then I guess expand their horizons and think that working outside of academia is more of a possibility. They kind of have to, I guess, leave behind the idea of being that tenure track professor that they had when they first started the PhD program. Did you have some sort of warning process of having to leave that behind, or were you more excited to just go into industry anyway?
I haven't fully given up on the idea. I think I still would love to teach more. And I think with my current job, I'm 100% occupied with what I do. So my energy levels aren't sufficient to maintain also, a persistent teaching role. But I could envision that, as you gain experience, your teachings become more valuable down the line as well. And then, eventually you might go back to a career where, maybe not a full research professor, but a lecturer at a university, depending on, which part of the professorship piques your interest. So, I know a lot of my friends, they love doing the science part, they love being in the lab, or they love giving presentations. Others really like the writing part, others dislike the writing part, applying for grants. There's a lot of financial pressure associated with that job. So carving out the niche that you think you want is something that can happen, in my opinion, at any time in your life. And so I think right now I'm enjoying the job that I have. I'll keep doing it, but maybe when I'm 55 or something, so 35 right now, maybe I can switch.
Yeah. Oh, you're absolutely right, Olli. Now that I think about it, I actually know somebody who did just that, but he didn't wait till he was 55. He's probably around 35, but he worked.
Okay.
He worked in industry for a few years, and then he decided he wanted to go back to academia. So now he's an assistant professor.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely possible. There's no real reason to kind of, I guess, cut that off. So
yeah, I think there's a certain fluidity, and the PhD just buys you the ticket for both jobs. Right? I think that's how I would say it.
For sure. So I know you mentioned earlier that the jobs you currently have involves taking stem cells and trying to make brains out of them. How did you come to that job?
So yeah, interesting journey. I started learning the technology and getting into the field during my postdoc. And so I went to one of the founding labs for the technology. And when I was there, I worked together with another postdoc from another lab, Saul Cato. And we got along very well, and he started analyzing my neural activity data. So these mini brains are actually active. Shouldn't say mini brains. They aren't really brains, right? They're brain tissue, but they're clearly still lacking a lot of brain features. But they are active, right? And you can look at the neural activity. And so he started analyzing that, and then shortly after, he got a professorship at UCSF and founded the company that I work for now. And then so he gave me a call and said, "Hey, do you want to come to San Francisco and build this thing with me?" And so I said, "Yeah, sure. I think sounds exciting." The other thing that I had started doing during that time was to help other people communicate their science. And so I think that's the other part of what you found from me online, where I had helped other postdocs prepare for their job talks. I had written papers together with other people, even though I wasn't, actually doing the science, I was reviewing their papers. And so this part of science communication, I realized I love a lot. And there are a lot of key concepts that, yeah, I think are just useful for everybody to know, like just like your experience in your courses, for any STEM professional to have, because communicating science is just in like times like now, where where we have the Corona crisis, being able to communicate science and stats in a way that everybody understands it, so that they can act in unison on that data, is absolutely key.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When you were talking, I know you mentioned preparing postdocs for their job talks. Are these talks in academia or talks in industry?
Those were in academia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, certainly the audience is going to be a bit different in academia than it would be in
Yes.
industry.
But now I have plenty of interview experience, so I could probably do the same thing with professionals that want to enter the industry part.
Yeah, I mean, my whole motivation for Teach the Geeks, it stemmed from me working as an engineer in medical device and having to give presentations every month in front of management. And when I say management, I'm talking about those C-suite people, CEO, VP of R&D, VP of marketing, those types. And I was terrible at first. Those presentations were absolutely horrendous. And I noticed that a lot of the other engineers, they didn't do a much better job at it than I did. And I think the biggest issue that a lot of us had is taking what we knew, our technical expertise, and putting it in such a way that non-technical people can understand. And that's something I definitely didn't take into account initially. But I saw the glazed, eventually you get tired of seeing glazed over looks and people just staring into space, not listening to what you're saying.
Yes. Yep.
It's like a waste of my time, waste of your time, just a waste of time and just for everybody. So
yeah.
I knew how to get better at it because I didn't want to look like a fool every time I had to give these presentations.
But I think that's also the hardest entry into presenting, right? Because reporting presenting is much more difficult than, say, you talking about your favorite topic, right? I think that's a big challenge that's often underestimated.
Yeah, for sure. So now you start this company. So you were working at a postdoc. The person that you were doing the research with starts a company in the Bay Area. He invites you to come join the company. You say sure. You go and you join the company. Were you originally just not just, but were you initially an individual contributor, or were you managing people right away?
No, I mean, started as an individual contributor, and in a startup, right? I mean, I was there on the first day, just seeing the dynamics, and the team is very small, right? So there isn't really a clear defined hierarchy or role differential yet. So it's driven by individual contributors that run the projects and then pool the resources towards it, right? So it's a lot more like a product manager, I would say. And so about more than 1.5 years ago, we then decided, okay, we need a research division that pushes the technology further while we also maintain all our other elements. And so that research division is now the team that I lead. And I started recruiting people for this. And yeah, it's been a fantastic experience. All of a sudden, the responsibilities shift, right? So you become, at least I became, very human focused, human centric, and then just trying to enable the team to do the best that they can do, right? So a lot of unblocking. Rather than doing the experiment yourself, you make sure that somebody else can do the best experiment that you think that they can do, by removing all the hurdles and obstacles that they have.
So are you strictly a manager of people now, or do you still do stuff in the lab?
I have to go in on the weekend. That's my feeding. So we basically take roles and we switch out the tasks. So when we maintain these cultures, the stem cells have to be fed regularly. And so I still do that. I still go in, but the amount of time that I spend in the lab is minuscule, right? It's all the other responsibilities, reporting presentations to the executive levels, updates, project updates, managing the timelines, making sure that everybody's on track is now basically, what I do. And then my fun time is when I can get on the whiteboard and discuss science with people, when they come back with results and say like, I find this really interesting thing, or, I need your help or your input here. That's when, when I can still be a scientist in the classical sense.
Okay.
And it depends, right? Sometimes there's more of this and sometimes there's more of the other.
All right. And then the people that report to you, do they have any opportunities to do any speaking themselves, or is it they tell you and then you communicate to the appropriate people?
Yeah. So I think we try, I always, when I did my PhD, I was always afraid of the journal, of the lab meetings, right? I think that's a classical thing to have in a scientific environment where you present your results, right? And so for us, it was typically every 3 to 6 months, you're up for presenting your results in front of all these people that have, higher educations than yourself, because you're still in training, and then, you get criticized a lot. However, I think it's very valuable to have this kind of culture where people present and get feedback. And so I think what I've tried is to create different opportunities for people to talk in front of others, right? So some people really like presenting other people's papers. So hosting a journal club, right? And leading the crowd through the room. And so I think that takes a little bit of the pressure away, because you're not, if there is a criticism, it's not directed at you, because it's your experiment.
That's hilarious. When I think about it, I mean, personally, I wouldn't want to present somebody else's data, because I just think that would just be more difficult, just trying to decipher or trying to interpret somebody else's stuff, as opposed to, it's my stuff. I know it inside and out. I can talk about it all day. But I guess I can kind of see someone else's point of view. But it just doesn't, like you said, if the data is crap, it's hey, it ain't my data,
Yeah, and it's, as you said, right? You can counteract. Basically, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, maybe that's what's happening, but maybe people are saying, okay, I don't want to present my own data because I'm going to get criticized of it, and the price that I have to pay is that I have to, read 4 or 5 papers around this one to make sure that I fully understand it, right? And so, what I encourage people to do is to, I would encourage everybody to do that, is just start with talking about things that you like, right? So just yesterday we had a journal club by one of my team members who was really interested in this one topic. And so she, spent a lot of effort into reading into it because she was interested in it. And I think if you're interested in something, it's way easier for you to communicate about something than if you have to report on something, right? So it's just because, if you talk with your friends about your favorite sport, right? I mean, you don't have to prepare, the stuff in and out, right? And there's a connection between you and the audience. And so it's all about body language and excitement. And if you practice that a little bit, then, you might prepare yourself better for, engaging on other topics with the crowd.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I remember when I was in high school, in English class, we used to do these debates, like parliamentary style debates, and you were assigned a side and you had to argue that side. I always found those really difficult, especially if I didn't actually agree with the side I was assigned. So when you say talk about things you actually know and like, I fully agree with you. It's really, it comes across too when you talk to people, when you talk to the audience, they see the authenticity, the genuineness of it, as opposed to man, I remember those classes in those classes. I used to struggle, like I don't know what to say, and I'm certainly it came across.
Yeah, I think what's often underestimated is body language, right? So the impact of communication that isn't verbal is huge on establishing a connection with the audience. So if you see people yawning and falling asleep in your presentation, check your body language. Right. You can hype people up and hype yourself up in that matter by changing your posture, right? I think there's a classic. I think it was last year. I went to a presentation by one of the graphic designers from Pixar, I think Pixar and Disney, and he was talking how body language is so easy to convey that you could use the carpet from Aladdin right? It doesn't have a face. It only has 4 points, 4 edges, but you can communicate emotions by just having the top edges hunch forward or, wiggling them up. And so if you do the same thing yourself, look in front of your, stand in front of a mirror and just look at how you stand when you talk. And you realize that changing your body posture will have a huge impact. So you can have somebody hunched forward, looking down, speaking very monotonously about some really really exciting piece of data, and nobody's going to get excited about it, right? Yeah, and to the opposite, you have some really boring piece of data and, just be really excited about it. And people go like, okay, I love your excitement, but why is this interesting? But at least they're paying attention, right?
Right, absolutely. When it comes to public speaking, is that something you've always been good at? And if not, what'd you do to get better at it?
I think not necessarily. I think it was easy for me to talk about the topics that I liked. And so maybe the easy entry was to understand the topics that you like. And then just, I've always been, talking to other people about concepts and ideas. And, that's what gets me going. And so maybe that was an easy entry. I think something that, in Germany, you had to present a little bit in school, but I did an exchange half year to Minnesota. So as an exchange student, and I had English speech as a class. And it was exactly the experience that you just described, where they force you to talk on a certain topic, and you're standing in front of the crowd, and then all of a sudden you have to, sell a product or, explain a political opinion. And I think that helped a lot. Other than that, I think my approach has always been practice and preparation. I think that's the key.
I fully agree with you when it comes to practice and preparation. And I think that probably has to do with the fact that you're a STEM person, just like me. Because I have a friend who's not a STEM person, and he makes fun of me because I like to practice and I like to prepare for these things. And whenever I speak to a scientist or an engineer, they say the same thing. And to me, it's always weird that he makes fun of me for it. Like, I'm not offended by this. Of course I'm going to prepare. Of course I'm going to practice what I'm going to say, because you don't feel as nervous when you know what you're going to do. That goes for me. When it comes,
I think it also gets you. It also gets you in this routine of, sometimes it's all about when you have a presentation and you focus on story. I think that's something that I've heard in many of the interviews that you've heard that you've recorded before. Mm-hmm. I think that's absolutely true. And so practice allows you to close the gaps in the story and prepare for potential interruptions by the audience, or adjust the story towards the audience, right? So it's easier if you have like the first sentence of the next slide in your head, and you're like, okay, this is my logical link, this is how I connect it. And then you gain confidence, and confidence then reflects back on your body posture. And then, yeah.
You've said nothing I disagree with, Olli. Everything you said, I fully agree with. When it comes to putting your presentations together, do you have a process for it? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, so I think that was a learning curve as well. Initially, I think I had the equivalent of a writer's block, where I would, I would sit in front of the computer, and then, you have to give this presentation about, your data. And so you start throwing all the data in, and you start making the slides look pretty. And then that doesn't necessarily lead to a good presentation. And so I took a course on writing from Ian Patton, who's a writing consultant. And I realized that there's a different approach that applies to writing scientific papers, but also, any presentation that you basically give. And so I typically start out with a skeleton, where I just have a single piece of paper, and I write down the key messages that I want to send, right? And to define what I want to send is basically, I asked, like I ask, who's your audience? What do you want to convey, right? And so knowing about your audience and knowing what you as a service provider that you are when you give a presentation need to give to the crowd, to please the crowd in a sense, right? Is what I take as a starting point, and then I build the skeleton. And it's very easy to shuffle the skeleton and see how the flow of the talk changes if you just move sentences around, right? So that takes you 20 minutes. And as soon as you have a rock solid storyline, then you actually start adding level of detail for the individual points. And only by the end, you then start actually making the slides, adding the data points, and making them look pretty.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you just said. I also start off with, it's funny. I didn't even mention that. So I mentioned that friend that makes fun of me for practice and preparation. I didn't even mention the fact that I have a process for it, because then he'll probably make fun of me even more. But I think it's really helpful to have that thing, or have a process that you go to, something that's repeatable. You do it over and over again for any kind of presentation that you have to give. It certainly cuts down on the brain power of having to come up with it up in a new process every single time. That seems like a waste of time to me.
Yeah, it also reduces the amount of time that you need to prepare for a presentation. And now, in a industry setting, it allows for quick collaboration, right? So we're typically in the team now when we're communicating, and I have another presentation coming up on Friday. When we're communicating, we communicate on the draft before actually putting the data in, because otherwise you're generating a lot of overhead, because you might be preparing a graph that is actually then not in the presentation in the end, right? And so you spend an hour making it look pretty, but it's not going to be in it. It's a waste of time. So yeah, focus on the storyline early on with simple tools, and then worry about making it pretty afterwards.
Absolutely. Do you ever get nervous before you give a presentation? And if so, how do you deal with your nerves?
I do. Every time. I actually think it's good because it heightens your awareness, and it makes sure that you can get into this excited state that then reflects through your body language. The one thing that I try to do for myself is to reframe it from, say, being nervous to being excited, which biologically is a very similar state. And other than that, yeah, I practice.
Yeah,
I go through the flow. I just try to get the story down. So even if you get derailed, which I think is what commonly throws people off, right? And it's easy for the audience to derail you just by yawning in your face, right? But then, I sit in some talks myself and I'm yawning, and the talk is even interesting, right? But sometimes you just have to yawn, right? Because you sit all the time, maybe the oxygen in the room is low. There are plenty of reasons for that. So preparing yourself for the reactions of the audience and saying, hey, that's okay, is a mental barrier that will allow you to, steer yourself towards reactions from the crowd.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, moral of the story there. If someone's yawning in your face, don't take it personal. Yeah. It might not even be anything about you. All right.
Exactly. Yeah. So positive reframing. That's what it is. Yeah.
No doubt. So is there anything else you'd like to add about anything that you're working on, Olli?
That's a tough one. I think it's exciting times. I mean, not meaning the coronavirus. I think that's where we all have to get through together now. And I see that the scientific impact that biology and the other STEM elements can do on society will likely really improve our lives in the next coming years. And that's something that was underappreciated, in my opinion, a few decades ago. So please get into these research fields and drive humanity to a better humanity by improved engineering, improved software development, improved physics, biology, and chemistry. Yeah, and please go out and speak about your work, right? I think it's really important that as a scientist, you have a reputation, or not a reputation, but you have a responsibility for society, which means to take the knowledge that you have and disseminate it in the environment so that you can bring everybody up. I think let's not have a knowledge gap, right? We already have a pay gap. Let's minimize the knowledge gap.
No question. So how can people get in touch with you, Olli?
LinkedIn, I think, is the best approach. So you can find me under Olli Wueseke on LinkedIn. I think it's probably going to be in the title of your recorded talk. So feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to, give advice or answer questions. I think is the I always like doing that.
Wonderful. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another episode of Teach the Geek Interviews. My name is Neil Thompson, founder of Teach the Geek. Teach the Geek is an online platform for science and engineering professionals. I know, I did it. I definitely know that. So the first offering of the platform is a public speaking course called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about it, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Take it easy, Olli.
Bye.